Stories are stories, and we've got one to talk about as we hear the story about how Annie K was murdered and who or what killed the scientist as we finally close this case. But first, I have to start this video by thanking you all for the past 6 weeks for watching, liking, sharing these breakdowns, and also sharing your great comments and your theories. You all made this experience a true joy. With that, it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 6, part 6, and the season finale of True Detective Night Country. It is December 31st, the 14th day at night. We open this finale with Navarro and Liz finding the right spot to enter the Night Country, as they give each other a look as if they really want to do this, but also a look of who's going to go down first, as Navarro says screw it and she jumps down, and as soon as she enters, she starts to begin to hear those whispers. As they continue to walk down these caves, we see Liz stops and Navarro says,
"You feel it too, don't you? Slippery, careful."
Yet again, this is an example of seeing Liz refusing to acknowledge that there's something that can't be explained. But that will change later on, as outside we see that the storm is only getting worse. We see Navarro stops and hears something calling to her, and she says that it's here, and she heads into this open space as Liz follows. As they reach a dead end, we see Navarro says it's here, and Navarro asks if Liz can hear it, and she says it's calling out to her, and out of nowhere she falls through the ice. Now as Liz is going to get help, she also falls as well. As it appears that they are trapped, they look around, and out of nowhere, here comes Clark just standing there looking at them as they begin to chase him. As they follow him, they stumble upon what looks to be a working laboratory, but they can't find Clark. As they look around, they look up and see the spiral marking on the ceiling, as they know this is the exact spot in which Annie K died. As our last shot of the opening credits show a rim of a tire on the floor of the research lab, a very important moment for Liz later in this episode. As Navarro looks for a way out, Liz finds a star-shaped piece of equipment, as we'll later find out this is the same one used to stab Annie K. Navarro finds a hidden door that leads to a ladder heading up, in which they follow. Now inside, we hear the song Twist and Shout playing, and it almost has this feeling of, for not only the characters but the audience, we have this sense of deja vu from the first episode, or as Russ Cole and Clark says later in this episode, time is a flat surface and it repeats itself. Meanwhile, back at Liz's house, we find Peter is finishing cleaning up the bloodbath left from last week's finale as he puts the bodies in his dad's trunk and he cleans himself as well. Now back at the station, Liz and Navarro have to split up to find Clark, as Navarro notices wet footprints that lead her to a dead end of a wall. As we watch Liz, who's turning off the music, she hears something and heads back to where they came, only for Clark to trap her inside this locked container. As Navarro hears this noise, she heads that way, only for Clark to knock her out with a fire extinguisher, and he begins to drag her away. Now, did you all notice something about that scene? First off, the footprints Navarro saw led her to where Clark was. I believe it was a sign from the dead and maybe her sister footprints back from episode 4. And second, you'll notice that Navarro didn't hear that song Twist and Shout whenever we got her perspective. It was only Liz that heard that song playing. Again, I believe this was a sign or a message from the dead, and I believe this was from her son Holden. This scene right here is very important to note throughout this episode. Both characters having to listen to the messages from the past and facing the things that haunt them head on. Now Liz manages to make it out of this container, but she finds Navarro beating Clark's ass, leaving him unconscious, as they realize they're stuck here because of the storm. Now back with Peter, he's seamlessly taking care of most of the mess, except he's missed a spot as Leah walks in. Now, disappointed to find out that Liz isn't home, Peter has to come up with an excuse of where Liz is and why he's cleaning up this house. We see Peter makes up this excuse of taking her back to his house because he doesn't want Kayla and Darwin to be along for New Year's Eve, in which Leah agrees. It looks like Peter has become a quick learner and lying on his feet from his dad and also Liz. Now, Liz and Navarro manage to wake Clark up, and Navarro's first question to him is if he actually loved Annie K, and he says yes. Now, to test this out, we see she plays Annie K's last video before dying. As this video clearly upsets him, Navarro tapes her phone to his chest as well as headphones for him to listen and to watch on repeat, in hopes to get him to speak about the truth of what happened in that video and what actually happened to Annie K. I don't know about you all, but for any of my movie buffs out there, this moment of Navarro leaving the video with him reminded me of Clockwork Orange as we watch Liz and Navarro leave the room to get some coffee. Now back with Peter, after dropping Leah off, we see Kayla knows something is off and she gets into the car with Peter. She knows that he is lying about something, and she even goes as far to say that Liz make you do something wrong. Now, in hopes to not make matters worse, we see Peter admits to doing something on his own and not because of Liz, and he needs to take care of this alone. He says that he has to do this one last thing, and after he does this, he promises to be fully committed to this family and this relationship. As we see, Kayla kisses him and tells him to be safe. For the first time this season, it was nice for once that Kayla actually agreed on something that Peter needed or wanted to do. Now, since this is the last scene between these characters, I just have to say, I don't blame the actors, but more so the writing and the lack of time spent between them wasn't all that developed. Now, I know on paper, Peter was trying to break the cycle of how he was raised, and I would say that Kayla had a gut feeling that Liz and his job would take him on this path that would be hard for him to return to her and her family, but I just didn't really care for that particular plot. Again, this is just my opinion, but let me know your overall thoughts on this particular relationship between Peter as a father to Darwin, which by the way, we only saw them in 2 scenes together, and how you felt about him as a husband to Kayla. Now back at Salah in the kitchen, we see Liz and Navarro having a discussion as out of nowhere, she opens the refrigerator and an orange falls at Navarro's feet, remembering the importance of the orange from episode 3 and 4. As she talks about how her mother used to love them, and she explains how her mother and Jules used to peel them, which explains why we see the peeling of the orange in the opening credits. As one would imagine that that's been her mother, or now after Jules died, trying to reach out to her with this orange, but again, remembering Rose's explanation and her experience with the dead, these moments are signs from the dead. It's a warning for them, but based on how things wrap up in this finale, it's safe to assume that this was from her mother or Jules. Now, Liz notices a piece of glass on her shoe, and we cut back to that same scene all the way back from episode 1 of her walking on glass from a car accident. Now, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I just want to stress how important these little details are, from the music playing, the wet footprints, the glass, the orange, as moments of signs for them both, and there's many more to come throughout this episode. As we see, Navarro says that Peter might be scarred for life after killing his dad, as Liz says,
I don't know. Maybe. It's crazy the shit we survived.
Now back with Clark, Navarro asks Clark if he was with Annie, as he responds that he wasn't there at first. He goes into detail and says that Annie K found some notes and pieced together what they were actually doing at the station. As we learn that they were digging for the DNA of a microorganism contained in the depths of the frost that could save the world, and they actually cracked it. They were able to do so because of the pollution of the mines helped soften the frost. As they were pushing the mines to push more pollution into the environment, into the water, into the ground to speed up the process, and in their minds, this was worth the many lives of few in order to save the lives of millions, if not billions. As we finally see what happened and meet Annie K's killers. Now, Clark claims that Annie K snuck into the Salal station as she was looking for paperwork to connect them to the mines, but discovered the truth and immediately started destroying all of their work. Now, Clark was awakened to her screams as he ran down to her to find Lund filled with rage, stabbing her with that piece of equipment shaped like a star. Now, in a panic for her life, we see Annie K begins to defend herself with another piece of equipment as she hits Clark, and she starts swinging at the rest of the scientists who have entered the underground laboratory. As they manage to get the weapon out of her hand, they all gather to stop her and begin to hold her down and allow Lund to finish the job by stabbing her 32 times. Now let's take a look at one of my early theories all the way back from episode 1. Check out this clip. Killed Anne. Now for my movie fans out there, I can't help but to make the connection between what's going on with these scientists and Anne in the amazing film by the name of Wind River. Now, without spoiling the movie for those that haven't seen it, which I highly recommend you all watch that incredible movie, I'm starting to think, what if Clark had a relationship with Anne? Maybe the scientist did something to her and Clark was forced to keep his mouth closed, or maybe Clark killed Anne himself. Now, this isn't exactly the same situation from that film, which again, Wind River is fantastic and it comes highly recommended for me, but what happened to Annie and those characters involved in that film are very similar, which makes me feel like I should be a detective for next season. But jokes aside, let's get back to this big moment. Now we cut back to Clark telling Liz and Navarro that he would never hurt Annie K. As we go back to that moment, he's saying sorry to her, he's holding her, he takes off his shirt and begins to wipe off her wounds, and all of a sudden, she's awake. Which in my mind symbolizes all the times we heard she's awake throughout this show, or at least from Clark's perspective. As we watch Annie K screaming and yelling for him to stop, we don't actually see the moment, but we can see that he's covering her mouth and suffocating her as she screams and she eventually dies. But also I want to point out that he left that part out of his story of him being the one to actually take the last breath away from Annie K as he had her blood covering his chest. Now this is an impossible question to answer, but just in the context of this show, what would you have done differently? Now, to answer my own question, if I was in Annie K's position, it's tough. Do you keep this to yourself for the time being and then leave to tell people that are not associated with the minds of what you found in risk of the opportunity of not being able to go back? Or do you do as Annie K did, you destroy all that information because I'm sure she didn't think that these scientists were capable enough to kill her? But then on the other side of that question, what would you do if you were the scientist? What would you do if you were put in their position? Again, taking Clark's word for gospel, you discover a way to cure all diseases and cancer, and you find this woman destroying years of research. Now, I'm just going to say it for myself. I don't think killing her is the right answer. There's definitely other ways they could have handled that situation. Again, I know this is a tough question, but if you were in the position of Annie K, what would you have done differently, or would you have done the same thing? And if you were the scientist, what would you have done? I'm very intrigued to read your comments in the comment section below. Now, before moving on, I do have to point this out. We've only spent maybe 5 minutes between Annie K and the actress that played her and also the actor that's playing Clark, but that scene was extremely tense, and you felt the emotion when he was killing her as he tells Liz and Navarro that he loved her. Like, to me, you saw both the look of utter sadness and anger from Clark as all this stuff was going on. You see that in his face, but also the fight for her life and those screams from Annie K. I gotta give an applause to both actors. That performance was great for both of them. Oh, and also, screw Lund. I don't have any empathy of him getting his arm snapped off back in episode 3. Hashtag justice for Annie. As Clark continues to tell them that it took over 2 years to rebuild what they lost, as Navarro says they cut out her tongue, but he claims that wasn't them. He tells them that a police officer, which we know is Hank, came to collect the body and that he must have been the one to cut out her tongue and leaving a message for the rest of the town. As Navarro looks at him in the eye and says to him, "Did you love her?" as he responds, he did. Now, she wasn't convinced, and we see her pulling out her gun as Liz walks out without stopping her. Now, we quickly cut back to the Wheeler case and we see him whistling, twist, and shout, and immediately cut back to Navarro yelling at Clark as he begs and pleads for his life, and we see her walking out, leaving him alive, at least for the time being. Now, Liz tells Navarro that she was about to kill him herself as we cut back to what actually happened in the Wheeler case. As we see Navarro in the moment seeing the dead girl and Liz calling her name, and she snaps back and shoots Wheeler point blank in the head. We cut back to the conversation as Liz needs to take a break and walks away. In this exact moment, if I'm being honest with you all, when I was watching this for the first time, the theories of Navarro being the one who killed the scientist because she has these blackout states and she's possessed was definitely becoming a reality, because it appeared that the dead girl in that moment of Wheeler was pointing for her to kill him, and we see that she did that with no questions asked. Which I guess in return makes me pose this question to you all in the comments. Was Navarro in some state of possession by the dead girl and killed Wheeler, or did she do that out of rage, out of anger of the situation, and knowing how she feels about women abusers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on your opinion in the comment section below. Now, to answer my own question, I look at it as that was Navarro making her own choice. I'm going to compare it to what we got in season 1 of True Detective, and that's this scene that you all can see on the screen now involving Marty. For me, I'm putting Navarro in that same mindset, and we'll discuss this particular scene a little bit later in this breakdown. Now, a lot just got revealed in this moment. I just want to take a moment to recap what we just found out. So number one, the scientist did stab Annie K nearly to death, but Clark was the one who actually killed her by suffocating her to death. And right now it appears that Hank was the one to cut out Annie K's tongue. I have more thoughts about that a little bit later. And if we're sticking with that idea, it was probably Kate that told him to do that, to send that message. And we also found out that it was Navarro that killed Wheeler, but Liz did want to do it. So a lot to take in, a lot of big questions that were answered in this scene. As we get another message from the dead, we cut to seeing Liz, who's cutting up an orange, and out of nowhere, mysteriously, the orange falls in the exact spot to where Annie K's tongue was found. As Liz begins to investigate, she notices a mark that's left from the tongue on the floor, but Navarro walks in. As Navarro tells her that there's still a job that needs to be done, we see that Navarro looks at the peelings and it's in the same shape of the spiral as we see the lights are flickering. Now, I'll be honest, I don't quite understand the marking of the tongue being left there as a sign from the dead, potentially, but the Navarro of it all, seeing the orange peeling from Liz being the same of the spiral, which may be the same way her mother peeled, which again is another example of her mother trying to reach out to her. Now, Clark tells them that Annie K was the one who killed the scientist, and he claims that he kept seeing her and hearing her voice more and more, and he knew that she returned. As we cut to the opening scene of episode 1, we see Clark running in fear. As we hear the others begging for their lives, and Clark ran and hid to the underground laboratory and locked himself in, as he believed this was Annie K back from the dead getting her revenge. As we see Lund tries to get in, he questions what he's so afraid of, as we hear Lund screaming and begging please, and the sounds start to fade away. As we see someone, or in Clark's mind, something trying to open the door as his light flickers and goes out, as we learn that Clark held this hatch for an hour for the span of an entire week. Now, Clark claimed that he was too afraid to leave, but he eventually came up to get some food, which explains the scene back in episode 1 when the supply guy saw someone running across the screen. Clark also took this opportunity to meet Otis to learn about the situation, but also learn how to survive Annie K. Now, even though she wasn't born, and this might be a reference to Setna, as Clark claims Annie K was hiding in the caves forever. As Clark says,
"Time is a flat circle, and we are all stuck in it."
A callback from season 1 from Russ saying the famous lines,
"This is a world where nothing is solved." Well, someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again.
Now Liz is fed up and she leaves the room, leaving Clark with Navarro as he begs her to end him or to at least let him do it. Now meanwhile, while Liz is trying to rest, she notices something in her hair and she finds Navarro's mother's own necklace, another important item from their past speaking to them, but again, they're ignoring it. We cut back to Peter with the bodies, and I love this shot of him driving down the street as the street lights cut off, almost symbolizing the light that he once had fading away as he gets rid of these bodies. Now back with Liz, she wakes up because of Holden screams to his mom. She notices that the temperature has dropped and the power is out as she looks for Navarro and she sees that the door is open. As she finds Navarro outside looking at Clark's dead body frozen in the snow just like the scientist. Now Liz is clearly upset and she blames Navarro for allowing him to go out and cutting off the power, but you'll notice that Navarro only responded to not being the one to cut off the power, which to me implied that she did allow him to take his own life without stopping him. But the question is, why did he go outside and freeze to death? Did Clark willingly go out there to die, or was something supernatural involved to make him take his own life, or do we believe that Navarro helped him in this act? Honestly, I wish we could have saw what happened when Liz was asleep. Like, what was the scene that took place with Navarro as well as Clark? Now, we obviously find out later that she recorded his confession, but I wish that we would have saw the actual moment, because was Navarro in a blackout state? Did she not notice when he left the room? Or again, did she allow it to happen? I'm very curious on why the show didn't give us that particular scene. As they split up to look for a backup generator, I want you all to look at this scene. Look behind Navarro. Now, that's obviously a ghost, but I couldn't tell who that was. Was that Annie K? Was that someone else? Was that Jules, or was that her mother? Let me know your suspicions and your theories of who this ghost is. But back with Liz, we see the rim of that tire appear from the opening credits as we see Liz check it out. As in my mind, this is her remembering the day that Holden and Jake died in that car accident. Now, Navarro hears whispers calling to her and guides her as she follows and sees Clark, as we get the reverse shot of what we saw the night of the scientist's death, as the moment it appeared that he was being possessed. Now, even after watching this multiple times, I'm still not sure on this scene as far as clarification. Let me know what you all interpreted this scene to be. Did Clark see Navarro in this moment? Did they look at each other face to face in that exact moment, but obviously in two different times? And this was all due to the fact that they're in the night country, aka the underworld, where time and space doesn't exist? Because my mind goes to Clark mentioning time repeating itself. Maybe we're seeing after Clark died, his punishment is to relive that night and time of thinking of Annie returning to kill him and the scientist. Now, this is me going off the deep end of theories and craziness. What if we're witnessing both Navarro and Liz and Clark in the night country? Meaning that they're all in between the dead and the living of the underworld. They're experiencing supernatural events with items from the dead and the dead being in the background. Are we witnessing them almost on the verge of death during the storm? Think about that. But in the meantime, we cut back to Peters, who's now at Rose's house to go to Julia's location because he's got someone who's going there as well. As Rose responds,
It's gonna be one of those nights, isn't it?
Now back with Liz and Navarro as both characters listen to the call from the dead. As we watch Navarro telling Liz there's something out there calling her and that there's so much more than just this and that it could be a comfort as Jules wasn't wrong. Now Liz responds by telling her that even though it's her sister, plain and simple, Jules just decided to quit. I don't think Navarro was trying to be rude or mean or try to clap back at her for mentioning her sister Jules, but we see Navarro does bring up Holden and mentions his eyes. As Navarro tries to tell Liz what she heard from her son, we see Liz shuts her up immediately. As Liz says that she doesn't know if he was trapped in the car, if he was scared, if he was hurt, or screaming out her name, as Liz threatens Navarro.
You wanna go out there and die? You wanna follow your ghosts and curl up in a ball and die out on the ice out there? You go ahead, but you leave my kid out of it! I will rip you apart. I am not merciful.
To me, this scene right here is why you get Jodie Foster. It's not that she wasn't already doing an excellent job in the show before this particular scene, but this scene made me feel every single word. You feel the pain she had inside of her because of losing Holden. Just a very powerful scene, which was paired perfectly to this very next scene, as to me it hits on the idea of Liz living with the pain of losing her son and living for the dead and not alive for the living. As we cut to seeing Leah calling her and leaves her a voicemail of her not dying and to make it back to her, which really makes me rethink some of my feelings towards Leah this season. She's been living with this shell of a person in Liz. Meanwhile, she has nobody. Leah is alone and she's seeking family and comfort because she lost her brother and she lost her dad, but Liz doesn't seem to make time to talk to her about her feelings. Again, while it was shortly lived, but I really appreciated those small moments that we got from Leah in this scene, as well as Kayla earlier. And again, I just wish that we had more moments from both of those characters, like this being one of the examples. We go back to Liz, who's trying to get some sleep, but she can't go to sleep as she's looking for Navarro. She sees Ashes leading her outside. As she finds Navarro in the middle of the snow walking, we cut to her in the same desert location that we've seen several times before. As we see her ears are now bleeding as she walks further and further and Liz is screaming out to her. I could be wrong, but the ear bleeding might have been explained in this moment. Maybe all the previous times she's been too afraid to listen and allowed her fears to get in the way of the voice trying to be heard. In those screams representing her fears or the voices telling her that she's sick or has a mental illness, but this time it's different. She literally pushes through and receives the message. As we watch her reach her hand out and she officially gets her name. Now, I mentioned this in my trailer breakdown of episode 6, and we don't really get the answer at all in this episode, but whose hand was reaching out to Navarro? Now, to me, it can either be her mother's hand. Now, even though we saw a shot of her mom hand point at her, and I don't notice any tattoos on her hand, but who's to say that she didn't get any later down the road when they got older? Or maybe it could be one of Navarro's ancestors that's giving her this name. Either way, this was a very important moment for this character, a moment she regret of losing her mom and not knowing her name until now. Now, while Navarro gets that revelation, we cut over to Liz as she hears Holden screaming her name and she looks down on the ice and believes that as she's seeing him, she proceeds to bang on the ice and falls into the water, and just when it appears that she's about to die, we see Navarro pulls her up and saves her. Now back inside, we cut to seeing Liz walking towards the car accident that killed her son and her husband, but she's wearing the same clothes of the present, as we see the shot of her body disappearing in the water. Almost a representation of her dying or getting close to death as Navarro tries to bring her back from the night country and back to the land of the living. As we see this montage of memories of her with her son and her holding that bear to celebrating his birthday and other moments in between that brought them joy. This to me was a beautiful representation of these characters facing their fears and facing their demons. I believe Navarro going back to that desert and Liz going back to the car accident was both of them on the verge of dying, but it wasn't their time to go, but instead facing what was holding them back. As throughout this series, they had one foot with the dead and one foot with the living, but they finally decided to overcome their trauma. To me, it was almost we were watching both these characters killing their past selves, metaphorically speaking. Liz in the water and Navarro with the storm, both of them having to come back on the other side to live, not with the memories or the heartbrokenness of losing their lost ones, or at least not at the moment, right? Because inevitably we all die, but instead live with the memories of the ones they lost and carry on the experiences they had with the ones that they cherished the most. Now again, I absolutely love how they played this out, but I will admit before moving forward, I understand the subtext in Navarro in the desert area and that being like PTSD for her, but I really wish that we saw the event of what actually happened in that moment, but also what exactly did her partner tell her besides listen. But again, I get it. Sometimes you don't need to see every little detail. For example, we didn't see the actual car accident, what happened to Holden and Jake. We just understand that this was a traumatic moment for Liz, and the same thing could be said about Navarro. As Liz is awake, she asks Navarro what did Holden say, as Navarro tells her that he says that he sees her and she covers one of Liz's eyes. If it wasn't already clear that the supernatural being a very important part of the story, this scene to me was the definitive answer. Because how else would you explain how Navarro knew that detail that wasn't shared with her between her and Holden? As we see Navarro holding Liz, and she lets her emotions out for the first time this season about her loss and sharing it with someone else. We see Peter breaking the ice, and this is cut between seeing Hank back from when he broke the ice to save his son Peter, now making the narrative connection of him being saved by his dad, only for years later the son is burying him after taking his life. Now Rose tells Peter not to look as she's preparing the body so it doesn't float in the water. As Rose tells him to finish what he started and close the door, I can't be the only one that feels like Rose has clearly done this before, especially after what she says next. As we watch him put his own father in the depths of the water, we see Peter gets a moment of clarity in which the man who raised him, loved him, and abused him is gone forever. As she tells Peter the worst part hasn't come yet. What comes after forever is the worst part, as it's January 1st, the 15th day of night, we get a shot of the beautiful northern lights. Now, for some, it's believed that the northern lights are lights that are dancing waves of color and are powerful guardian spirits, and that these are the spirits of ancestors who come to meet and bless them. Now, going back to what I talked about with Rose, having might have done this before, and I could be completely wrong, but just thinking about when Peter goes to her about getting rid of a body and her not having any hesitation or asking any questions, it makes me wonder to handle this situation. Now, again, she seems very much in tune with living out there in the snow. When we first met her, we saw her gutting a wolf. Do you all have this feeling that she has gotten rid of a body in the past, which just adds more layers and mystery to the character of Rose? As the storm has come to an end, we watch as Navarro continues to help Liz, who's recovering after falling in the waters after they both faced their demons. We see Liz wishes Navarro a happy new year as she recalls the time Navarro talked about walking out and disappearing, and if she ever decides to do that in the future, to come back. I want you all to remember that line for later in this breakdown. As we watch Navarro talk about what Clark did and how she's been holding the hatch for a while, this sparks an idea for Liz to get the DNA of who or what tried to open the hatch from when Clark tried to hide. We see Liz uses liquid chemicals and finds the fingerprints of the last person to grab the hatch, and it's missing 2 fingers, just like the fingerprints found on the scientist's clothes, and surprise, surprise, it is Blair. But the question is, who knows who killed Annie K? As they head to their suspect. As they arrive to B's house, we remember that Blair has been staying there after getting into a fight with her ex-boyfriend. Now, you'll notice when B asks who wants to discuss what happened to the scientist, you'll see that B looks right past Liz and looks directly at Navarro. As Navarro answers with her full name, which means the return of the sun after a long darkness. As this is what lets them in, but I want to focus on Navarro, this is them allowing her to be in, and this having a double meaning. And making the narrative connection and taking the meaning of what that names means and applying it to the characters being in the darkness for most of the season, but having to return after their spiritual awakening after so long. But also pointing out the character arc for Navarro. Remember the scene back in episode 1 when she took the call about the fight at the crab factory and B asked her what her name was given to her? Or remember the time when we saw Navarro arresting Annie K and how the women treated her, and even thinking about the time when Oliver did the same thing. So for her to now have her name and to say it with such integrity and pride, this was a moment that she finally felt embraced. Now inside, B tells them that the scientist was the one that killed Annie K. Now for the last 6 years, they thought that it was a town, but they finally understood. As we cut to seeing B cleaning at the station one day as she discovers the hidden lab. As she goes down to the station, she finds that star-like piece of equipment, and while it's not too fully explained how she was able to make the connection, I would assume that it's because it's a small town, and how Annie K's body was found most likely got around in the townspeople. As we see one of them taking photos of Annie K's body from the files as they manage to figure everything out, very similar to how Annie K understood what the men were doing in collaboration with the mines. as they had everything they needed to finish their version of the story. Now, the reason they didn't report this or get the cops involved is because this would have changed nothing. As we see the women that we've seen throughout the show enter the room as they wanted to change the story and have a different ending. Now, as the story goes, we cut to seeing them together entering the station with guns in hand and taking each of the scientists one by one, and we even see the moment where Clark hid and locked himself in the hatch, and we see that it was Blair trying to open the hatch. I absolutely love the intense indigenous music in the background as we see this scene, because to me it just made it so much more satisfying to experience what's about to happen to these scientists. Now, Navarro flat out asks if these women killed them, which we see B responds by saying that they did it to themselves after digging into her home in the ice and killed her daughter and woke her. As she was saying this, we see them loading the scientists into the back of a truck. Now, on many occasions, we've spoken about the story of Sedna on this channel in previous breakdowns and her mythical lore being throughout this show, and pretty much confirmed in episode 4 of the True Detective podcast by its own creators. I want you all to take a listen to this clip.
The story of Sedna still influences our culture today. Many Inupiaq women have tattoos of lines on their fingers to honor Sedna. While the story is open for interpretation, I believe it shows that humans are not in control of nature and that you should always be respectful and a little bit fearful of things outside of your control. I think it also represents the power and independence of Inupiaq women who should be treated with honor and respect.
Now, connecting what you all just heard from that podcast and connecting to the story, the scientists not only disrespected the land, but also disturbed the nature under the ice, but they also killed a woman in the process. Which led to, if you want to call it the nature or spiritual supernatural beings, I believe this led to Sedna showing them ill will on their deaths. Now, as they arrived to the location, they forced them to remove all their clothes and then make them walk out to the middle of the snow. As B says, if she wanted them, she would have took them, and she says that if not, their clothes were there and they could have survived, but they didn't because she wanted to take them. And I love this line here from B herself as she says to Navarro and Liz,
I guess she wanted to take them. I guess she ate their dreams from the inside out and spit their frozen bones.
As we see that it was B, the one that actually marked Lung with the spiral marking. Now, for weeks we have been discussing how will the show explain what was actual reality and what was supernatural, and I think they did a really good job, in my personal opinion, at handling this particular subject, as the logical answer to the scientists was, well, without their clothes, they froze to death. But for those in the camp like myself that believe that Sedna and the supernatural and the spiritual were involved in the show, I believe that Sedna, or Mother Nature, ate them and spit them out, which would explain how their bodies were found. And whenever we would have a character referring to she, it was referring again to, my opinion, the supernatural, Mother Nature, Sedna, taking care of those bodies. But as we see B says, it's just a story. But I want to know in the comments, what do you all believe happened to the scientists? With no clothes, in that weather, of course they would have froze, and their eyes and their ears and their fingers would have been bitten off, and those were the effects of being out there with hypothermia, and that's the scientific reasoning. But for those that believe that supernatural were involved in their death, let's have this fun discussion in the comments below. As we watch the women gather together in the kitchen and they say to Liz, what's it gonna be? Will they take them in or will they let things be? As we watch, Navarro says,
Stories are stories.
Now, I want to play you guys another part from that same podcast in regards to explaining the importance of these stories.
While some of these stories may seem shocking, Robin mentioned how preserving these traditions can ultimately bring connection and hope.
With these stories, I really want to try to bring back the history of our people. So many of them are lost, and I'm just trying to show that we had stories from a long time ago that are no longer being told by a lot of people anymore.
As Liz tells them that the case is officially closed and we see Navarro waits behind, you'll see B gives her this acknowledgement or a sense of welcome or belonging, something Navarro's been wanting for a very long time. But the question remains, what about Annie K's tongue? As B says, it's not a part of their story and has no clue what she's talking about. Now, was that just a clue from the dead? Now, to answer my own question, I believe just like Holden's polar bear, Navarro's mom's necklace, the song Squish and Shout, or the orange, and now this tongue, these were messages or signs from the dead, like Rose said, them trying to reach out to the living and helping Liz and Navarro solve this case. Let's have this discussion in the comments respectfully, because I can hear people screaming in the comments now, Liz and Navarro are gonna allow these women to get away with murder, which technically they did kidnap the scientists and they took their clothes and let them walk in this bad weather, but again, they didn't technically kill them, but you know, technicalities aside, I can hear you all saying that. And also, Liz and Navarro got away with murder with killing Wheeler. Same could be said about obviously Peter shooting his dad, but in my response, I will respond by saying, do you all feel the same way about the masterpiece of season 1 of True Detective? And I'm referring to when we saw both Marty and Russ kill the killers to end the loop. It was fine then, right? Again, remembering time is a flat circle, and this show obviously paying homage and paying its respects to what came before it. And while in my personal life, I do not agree with police officers taking the law in their own hands, but in the context of True Detective season 1 and here in season 4, and seeing the situation and getting to understand these characters, it made sense to me how they handled the situation. But again, let's talk about it respectfully in the comments below. As it's May 12th, 5 months later, the first long day of the year, we cut to seeing Liz getting investigated about what actually transpired. As they question what happened to Hank, as she says it's an ongoing investigation, as Otis was killed by Hank, and the story goes, Hank was seen on tape following Liz and Otis, and he must have killed him after Liz questioned him. As she believes there's a deal gone wrong, and Hank must have had an accident and gone missing in the blizzard. As Liz says,
Come summer, we'll find him. We always do. Unless we don't.
We see Peter enters the room to give Liz some coffee as Liz tells them where his whereabout was during all these events, which essentially clears his name of any wrongdoings. Now they bring up how strange it was that Clark died in the same way as the others, as Liz responds,
Incredibly odd. Some questions just don't have answers.
Which was a great response from this character, because if you think about her philosophy earlier in the season and how now this is the complete opposite of her famous saying of throughout the show that everything has answers if you look for the right questions. But more importantly to the character, it shows she's taken more of an acceptance of the unknown after what happened at the Salal station and having her a spiritual awakening. Now what about Navarro, as we cut to seeing Liz at Navarro's house to find out that she's gone. As we see, Navarro has left Liz with Holden's bear, the same one that she threw out a couple episodes ago. She also gave back Kavik his toothbrush, but that's not all. As Liz says, she came here looking for something and found it. As we see her walking in the snow, which is a callback to her walking away from all those times throughout the show in the snow as someone was calling to her, but this time she's found herself and she knows who she is and she can move on. As we see Liz looking at the video recording of Navarro took before Clark took his own life. Now in this video, it's him detailing everything about the mines and the pollution and the effects it had on the town, but also its people, and this message would end up getting leaked out. Now we don't see or hear the rest of the video, but one would assume that he confessed about Annie K's death as well. As we cut to seeing the mines have been shut down, as we see the same man from back in the opening scene of episode 1 of this show. As we see Liz say to the investigators that this town was here before the mines and it would be here long after. As we get our final shots of seeing Leah and Liz happy in the car, you'll also notice that Leah has the tattoos on her face, meaning that she's embraced her heritage, and also Liz accepts this. As Liz says, they will not find Navarro's body out on the ice, which to me meant that she's not going to be found dead like the others because she's more connected than ever before to her spiritual experience. We get to see Peter with his son, which to me implies everything worked out between him and Kayla. In our last shot, we hear them ask about the sightings of Navarro as we see Liz walking out to her balcony and says,
Well, this is Ennis. Nobody ever really leaves.
As we see Navarro appears. Now, to kind of detail that moment of Navarro walking in the snow and also appearing on the balcony of Liz, remembering what B said, if she wants you, she'll take you. And if she doesn't, you'll survive. Now, if we follow the idea of this belief of allowing Mother Nature or the Mother the Sea and Setna to get into this discussion and bringing it back to the character Navarro, she came out of the darkness and into the sun. It's taken a moment to speak about the supernatural, which again, I am firm into the count that the show was hinting at Setna being the supernatural entity in the town and the town's legend. Setna is the one that B was referring to in the caves. The Night Country picks and chooses who lives and dies. Now, I'll be addressing or making theories during our after show or making a separate video about the following unanswered questions. What was the deal with Annie K's dreams of the spiral tattoo, and what was going on in Clark's trailer? What about Kate and Connolly and the Tuttle family, and also Rose? What happened to Otis all those years ago? What happened to Oliver? The use and the meaning of the spiral as it pertains to the story. So again, keep an eye out for maybe a separate video or watching a replay on my after show to address those unanswered questions. Now, keeping the tradition alive and naming these episodes, I'm going to name this finale Stories Are Stories. Make sure to share your title in the comments below. Now, wrapping up this video with my final review of the finale and my overall thoughts of the show. I've seen the finale 2 times at the time of this recording, and I can say that I definitely enjoyed the finale the second time around. Came to really appreciate the narrative of seeing both characters facing their past and dealing with their traumatic experiences head on. Liz being someone who shut herself off to people at work, or someone like Navarro who cared about solving Annie K's case all those years later, and looking at how she treated Leah, but seeing her growth, but also her belief in something more out there, and her taking in the messaging from Holden. And also, as expected, what an incredible performance by Jodie Foster. Taking a moment to talk about the star of this show, and that's Reis as Navarro, a very complex and flawed character who was led by rage and shut herself off to others, but cared deeply about the only person she cared for, which was her sister Jules. And after losing Jules and her reflecting on her mother not giving her a name, to seeing where she ended up, to me, was beautifully written and performed incredibly well. I can't wait to see what Kaylee has lined up next, because she was a bona fide star in the show, in my personal opinion. I was a fan of Issa López prior to this show, but now I'm a bigger fan. Now, I know it wasn't for everyone, but the way she handled the supernatural and the grounded nature to the story, and mixed it with each episode with us questioning what was real and what wasn't, to me made this a thrilling story and a wonderful experience from beginning to the end. Now, I've said it in past videos, but my main criticism is the 6-episode format. It didn't allow some of the supporting characters to fully be realized. For example, Hank's story with his bride, and wanted more of his relationship with Peter instead. Peter and Kayla and their marriage. Leah's story feeling kind of rushed at points, but also not getting full closure to what happened with Kate and Connolly and even Oliver. I feel as though 8 to 9 episodes would have benefited for those characters and those subplots. Again, I wouldn't say I was unsatisfied, but it would have enhanced the series for me if we would have had more time with those characters and those subplots. So I would give this finale a high 8 out of 10. Great tension, the main questions getting answered, and seeing a good conclusion to our leads. Now, overall for the season, I'm going to give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. Overall, very pleased with the story, the sense of the horror. I love the environment and the mystery surrounding everything. And I would have to say, this is my second favorite season, behind season 1, but also in front of season 3, and followed by season 2 being my least favorite season of True Detective. I would say my favorite character in the entire series is Navarro. My favorite episode was probably episode 5. So make sure to leave your final thoughts, your score of the finale, season overall, where this season ranks for you. Let me know your favorite character and your favorite episode in the comments below. Now, as I said up top, I can't thank you all enough for supporting these videos. I know they were long, but I thank you all so much. Now, if you're still here watching this video at this point, you are the true MVP. So do me a favor right now in the comments, put hashtag stories are stories. Now, while this might be the end, I do have a few more videos planned for the show, but also join me live right now Sunday night for our live after show, as I'll be taking your live questions and sharing more thoughts about this finale and the series. So come and join us for the live after show. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.